Welcome to Off the Wire, the podcast that helps you curb cybersecurity risk and tackle technology challenges. I'm Tanner and I'm joined by Anthony. We're two IT executives with a combined 35 years of experience in the IT and cybersecurity field. Let's start the show. So it's episode 23, and I think we kind of wanted to change things up a little bit. I know me and you are going through a kind of the same process in the year, and we thought this would be kind of an interesting, I guess, timely topic for those that might be also going through it. So we named this "The Science and Art of an IT Budget," and I thought you had a really great idea with this episode, kind of talking about maybe some tips, some pitfalls, some strategies that we had around budgeting, how you can spend a little bit smarter, making sure you're aligning your technology, and we'll talk about that. And then I thought you had an awesome idea talking about maybe some of the things we're excited about for 2025, some of the things that we're looking to potentially invest in, and to maybe even get feedback from listeners to see what they're investing in for 2025. Budget season is upon us, and I think it's maybe not everyone in the technology field's favorite time, if that makes sense. So I think the number one goal of any budget really is to align that budget. You talked a lot about this. We were talking kind of prior to the episode as we are doing research. A strategic plan is really critical. So I think even before budget, really you have to kind of start with your strategic plan, don't you?
Yeah, and I guess before we get into that, though, I just wanna mention, and maybe this is my type of personality, but I really beat myself up every year on the budget, and I try to start it earlier and earlier every year. Honestly, I my holdout is finance, really just, waiting to give us some analytics and some data. I wish they would give it to me a month ahead, but, yeah, I feel like I could do a better job. I don't necessarily do a bad job, but definitely could do a better job of budgeting. That's what I feel like every year.
Yeah, it's tough. In technology world, we're really pulled two directions. I mean, you've got this pull not only from your own personal interest, but from this feel like you got to lead your company into grander technologies, like pulling everyone along. But the flip side of that is you don't have a bucket that keeps getting bigger every single year per se. So you really have to balance that out. Is how do we kind of move ourselves forward technology and from a strategic point of view, but not just completely blow the lid off of our budgets.
The strategic plan, though, for the organization, that's definitely something you need to reflect on before really diving into the budget. And if your department has a strategic plan, that's another thing you want to tie in. Of course, they should, kind of go hand in hand, the organization and department. But yeah, that's definitely the focus is, what are we trying to do as an organization? And like for us, we're trying to be more efficient. We're trying to, weed out some of these archaic processes we have. And cybersecurity is a huge part of our strategic planning. So that's been a heavy focus these last couple of years.
Yeah, and that's if you think about it, that's kinda something that got added to everyone's budget. 10 years ago, I think there was definitely some spend in that area, but nothing like it is today, or actually feel like we're causing us to have to spend more money. Money that maybe we don't wouldn't like to associate that or something that we would like, we'd prefer to put that money somewhere else. But we start early in the year. I don't know how you guys do it. We start early in the year with a strategic plan. We're literally kind of in January, working our way toward the middle of the year before we get that actually approved. So it rolls right into our budget season. And we think about do a SWOT analysis and many other different types of analysis, figure out, especially from a technology point of view, what's out there, what's coming, what things do we need to look out for, what things do we need to be ahead of. And I assume you guys kind of do that same process.
Yeah, we really don't get heavy into it until the fall, but all year there's a little bit of we keep a folder, our whole department keeps a folder, and my methodology honestly is for I tell my guys just to throw anything at the wall and we'll see what sticks at the end. Just because you throw anything that you have an idea on uh, in our little folder where we keep our budget information, but we'll weed it out in the fall. And sometimes we look at stuff and we're like, yeah, it's a great idea, but maybe we don't have the resources or the money, and we'll kick that can another year. There's been a couple things like that. Try not to kick the can too much, but you can only do so much a year. And anyways, I think just getting input from your folks at any time, I think that helps.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna definitely go through a list of tips here, but I think really it's gotta, like, start with strategic planning. So, once you do your strategic plan, then as you go through these tips that we're gonna talk about here in a minute, you can align those. So, where, you kinda mentioned, don't wanna get too far ahead, but mentioned talking to people. You can say, "Well, they say they need this. Does this align with what we need to do as a company? And if it does, then, hey, this is something I need to put in the budget." So kinda going down the tips that we talked about, I think you brought up a really good point about auditing your existing technology stack.
So, yeah, you definitely wanna audit your technology stack and whether and that comes with both hardware and software, and we're constantly doing this throughout the year, but, like, with I'll give just an example with Microsoft 365. Our folks, we went through and reviewed every single license and how many we were getting and all that, and through talking with our vendor, we were able to make several changes and get that reduced, by over $1,000 a month. And then this is something of which I know you're aware of, and I was not. So we went to another vendor that sold Microsoft 365. We were working with them on a new vulnerability scanner, but we're like, "Hey, why don't you let us take a look at your Microsoft 365 licensing?" And I was like, "Well, we just reduced it by over $1,000." I was like, "I don't think you're gonna be able to do much." Come to find out, I really feel a little dumb about this, but we had E3 licensing, and I felt like we had to have it, and he's like, "Well, why don't you look at business premium?" And I was like, "Well, there's some stuff it doesn't have," and he's like, "I don't think that's correct." He's like, "Besides the going from 100 gig to 50 gig," he's like, "How big are your mailboxes?" And we were constantly comparing E5, E3, E1, and we also look at 1 and a couple other licensing, but we did not look at the business premium, and he showcased that for us, and we're actually gonna be gaining, some of the security functionality that we weren't paying for. Our mailbox is the biggest mailbox is about 15 gigs, so we're nowhere near 50 gigs, so we're gonna be making a switch again, even saving more money. You really gotta audit the stuff and be looking at it constantly, and you honestly need to shake it up with the vendors as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there's a good there's a good balance. If you feel like your vendor's kinda gotten a little bit complacent, I mean, I think this happens in life. Insurance, I think there's some other areas as well. You sometimes just need to go and shop around a little bit. Doesn't necessarily mean you don't like your vendor, it just means you're kinda keeping them honest and making sure that they're actively engaged in getting the best price for you. Totally agree with that. I have another good example. It kinda goes right along with it, kinda right sizing like you were saying, and auditing your technology stack, and I would say my tip in this area is make sure that you're utilizing all of your technology stack. Look at your existing vendors. A lot of times, instead of like getting a new piece of software in an area, you could actually look at your vendors and they may offer somewhat or maybe most of what that software would have covered. And it can just be an add on to what you're already spending versus a potentially new contract with another vendor. And I have a good example. We use Rapid7 for our SOC, SIEM, XDR services. We were looking at some of the dark traces of the world, that network monitoring, network baselining, and we were looking at that and come to find out that Rapid7 actually, was kind of a new product to them, but they had a free version that we could use that did some things, and then they had a paid version that we could use that really enhanced, some things as well. Is it exactly Darktrace? I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it's quite, that level, but is it, 50 to 60%, of Darktrace? Yeah, I think it does offer a lot of those same features and at basically a sixth of the cost. So, definitely look at an existing stack, especially if you've been with a vendor for a long time. I know we had been for several years, and it kinda when you get several years, you get in this habit or this cycle where you get the renewal and you just go ahead and sign the renewal. "Okay, we're using them again next year," and you don't necessarily do like a product map with them to see what they've added. Maybe they purchased someone and maybe they're offering a new feature.
Sometimes going with a new product that you haven't used in the past, even if you go with something you don't think is ideal, if you go with that and use it for a little bit of time, it'll give you a better understanding of what you want down the road. So, I mean, we're applying for some grant money for an OT monitoring solution, and part of the grant, it was a product that we wouldn't pick, but I'll say this, it's still a good product, and after we use it, we'll learn what we want out of the solution, and after that grant money's over, then we can either stay with it because we really like it, or we'll know exactly what we're looking for in a future product.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sometimes using a product helps teach you a little bit about not only that product, but really just generally those types of products. Communicating with stakeholders, I think this is critical. We have a process that's taken several years to kind of get everything nailed down, but where our budget time is kind of right about now. In the summer, early summer, I start meeting with different departments, kind of asking them, you know, are things like working? What are things that are working for us? How does technology working great for you guys? Right. What are the weaknesses? What are the weaknesses not only in our technology stack, but what are the weaknesses in us as a department, in our service level? Is it we're not getting to things quick enough? And I tell them to be very frank with me, because no one gets better by someone sugarcoating everything. And that's really been good. And I know you had a couple examples as well about stakeholder engagement.
I've discussed this in other episodes, but being knowledgeable of all the other departments at your organization, like that's what separates a decent IT department from an awesome IT department is really, and we're not going to be experts in all those processes, but just being aware. And anyways, we were in a staker meeting. We have staking engineers and they go and kind of design the electrical grid for us. And anyways, we were out there and they're using a new iPad tool, and we were out in the just a normal sunny day, which they typically are working, and they were looking at the maps on their iPad screen, and I literally could not see anything. Like, they didn't say a word, they didn't have one complaint about it, but I was looking at this and I was like, "How do you see?" Like, "Yeah, it's pretty hard to see." And, this is something I was like, "Well, we can get an iPad Pro and it has a higher brightness. We can go from 600 nit to 1,000 nit by getting an 11-inch Pro." And you look at that, we do a 5-year rotation on our iPads. We're not just going out and buying all brand new iPads for the staking engineers, but when it's up for their time for renewal, we're replacing it with the iPad Pro to get that higher screen brightness. But, you break out over 5 years, the lifespan that we get out of those, it's only a couple $100 a year, and if you look at what we're paying a state engineer, what they're being paid and their benefit package, it's well worth the investment. And anyways, just, being familiar with how people work and how they do their job and how you can make their life better and make them more efficient at their job.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If you're someone in a leadership role where you're doing planning and you're doing budgeting, you can't only stay in your office. You need to be out. You need to be talking with those people that are on the front lines. You need to be talking to those people that are in the field. If you can, and I know obviously you have a lot on your plate, but if you can, be with them. Like actually do some job shadowing. Sometimes people will never tell you something. Just to your point there, they will never tell you something, but you will notice it when you're out there. And I think there's even something they feel like even more valued, I think, when that happens, right? Everyone hates to complain. They don't wanna say like, "Oh, this iPad's not bright enough." But for you to actually go out, recognize that there was a deficiency there, and to actually take care of them, I think that really helps you out, later on down the road when you need to ask something of them. I think you're gonna get less heartache, you're gonna get more buy-in, all of those kinds of things as well.
The next tip we had is leveraging automation, whether that be AI or just some other technology to automate tasks or lighten workload of others. That's one of my favorite things. I feel like I'm a little envious of software developers because they get to build a product and people get to use that. But for IT perspective, I think one of the, they kind of say it's a thankless job. But one thing that it really brings joy to me is putting something in, doing some automation or putting a system in that just shaves hours of work for somebody. That's just one thing that, I love to do and love to accomplish. And one thing that we've been doing with that, and we'll go into a little bit further, but is just using low code tools. And we've been able to do some amazing things with some processes at our organization with that.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think we're going on like 6 or 7 years now of using low code platforms. We started a long time ago. You know, before a lot of co-ops. I'm sure there was some co-ops that were ahead of us, but it's really changed the game. Is it something that you want to take on every single project? No, I don't think it is. I don't think it's something where you want to go ahead and rework an existing product. Like for example, you talked about Office 365. I don't think you want to low code your own chat platform, right? Or low code, your own email platform or something like that. But is there an area where 2 pieces of software need to talk together that they can't? Or is there an automation, especially around reporting or data analytics or something like that, where you can pull some data, go ahead and shift it, translate it, transform it into something else, actually put it into place, email people, take away some of that manual labor. We talked a lot about this on the last episode on ChatGPT and how the technology is there. to get rid of some of that manual labor and give us some of that more time to look at strategic things. So I totally agree with that. Whether it's low code, whether it's just scripting, using Python, using PowerShell, even from an IT perspective, there was a saying, and it's been a long time since I've read it, but there was a saying on a kind of a top 10 system administrator mantras, I guess. And one of them is if you have to do it more than once, automate it. If we're doing things over and over, whether that's PC imaging or anything that we do, then we need to have a script in place so that we don't have to manually make these changes every single time.
Yeah, evaluating whether to build or buy something, that's definitely something you need to really think about. I know some people can kind of get caught in, well, we can do that, so we should do it. That's not always the best case. And especially if you keep doing it, you're either going to have to hire more bodies or you're just going to get overloaded and you're not going to have good support with those products. So it's definitely something you need to really heavily think about as you budget.
Yeah, I got a great example on that actually just happened recently, and I'll kind of add to that and just saying, even if you build it, doesn't necessarily mean you need to keep doing it that way. So we have been, as I mentioned, been using low code for a while. We built a texting process for one of our pieces of software so that if someone paid a payment, if they made like a delivery with that software, there was a few other things as well, surveys, that we would send them a text to our customer. Well, what happened is that software was deficient in that area, it didn't have it. And now just recently in the past like 6 to 8 months, that software vendor has actually built that process out, and it does have some advantages, a few more things than we had built out as part of our process. But we did a evaluation, we did an audit, and we looked and we said, this has served its purpose. It's been 5 or 6 years. We built it. There's some pride to that. You don't want to necessarily let it go, but now there's something that's better that's in place. So let's not maintain that anymore. Let's take that off our plate and let's focus on something that is going to add to our plate here next year.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a tough pill to swallow to do away with something you built, but definitely that's something that I wish there are some organizations that we work with that they would stop using their homegrown products and just go buy a system out there. But anyways, yeah, that's definitely a good one.
There's always pros and cons. I think that's something I've learned as I've gotten older. There's no free lunch. There's never a product or a decision or anything like that that's going to be full of all kinds of pros and have zero cons. There's always going to be something, like to your point, if you build it, it's going to be customizable just to you. It's going to be exactly how you want it, but it's going to require more maintenance. It's going to require more staff. So as long as you keep that in mind. We were talking a little bit, and I think you had a really good point. You already mentioned it about cybersecurity and how that's kind of gotten into our budgets now, but you said something that really struck me, I guess, was tracking your cybersecurity spend and make sure you emphasize your cybersecurity spend in your budget.
This is specific to our industry, being an electric cooperative industry, but we have a statewide organization and a national organization, and they've really been pushing the importance of cybersecurity to our CEOs and our board of directors. And honestly, I owe them a lot of thanks because that has helped our job tremendously. So typically, if we're looking at a cybersecurity product, a lot of times it's getting approved more than questioned. And but with that said, I think everyone is starting to understand the importance of cybersecurity. So when you're coming up with items and you're wanting to sell them to, your board of directors, your CEO, or whoever you're presenting to, whether or your manager, if there's a way to tie it into cybersecurity, I would be quick to point that out. So we're looking at replacing some switches. We've got some Ethernet switches, some fiber channel switches that are end of life. You could just mention, hey, this is an end of life device and we're wanting to replace it because it's 8 to 10 years old. Or you could say these things are end of life and they no longer get security patching and they will have vulnerabilities that we will not be able to fix. And so we need to replace that. There's lots of things that tie in that help cybersecurity. So I would just be quick to point that out on those items.
That makes a lot of sense. Cyber really at this point, it's non-negotiable. It's something we gotta have, especially in our industry. But honestly, I can't think of a single industry that doesn't really need to be put in a lot of work into cyber. I've been to many conferences and they always say you're not spending enough. So that's actually based on your tip as we were doing preparing for the show. I did start tracking that. And one thing I would kind of add to just tracking your numbers is don't just track your numbers for that year. Track all of those numbers for going back multiple years. So if you have capital expenditures, track what you spent in capital or what you spent in expense and do that as far back as you can and go ahead and trend that as you go. Sometimes that'll answer some questions. Someone will say, hey, we're buying an awful lot of switches this year. What's the deal? And you can go back and you can say, hey, 8 years ago when we bought these switches, they were just as expensive. and here's where we spent the money, and that can kind of answer some questions for you.
Yeah, Tanner, I know you've been doing this quite a while longer, tracking your cybersecurity costs, but that's something I just want to throw out to those people out there. If you're not currently tracking your cybersecurity tools and costs that you have throughout the year, I would definitely work with your finance department and create a new item ID, account ID, or whatever you guys use to track your budgeting items. That's something, whether you think you need it or not, I would go ahead and start it. And that way you've got some history behind it. I think that's very important these days is to be tracking those costs. And I would also look at it as a percentage of your budget. What are you spending? So I think that's a good idea for anyone these days.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think if you hear those kind of things like, "Hey, we need to be spending," I'm just making out a number though, making up a number, but we need to be spending 20% of our IT budget on cybersecurity, and you're not, maybe that gives you a little bit of leverage. Or if you are, you just don't mention it. But one of the things that I think a lot of times we think about hardware, we think about kind of items that we're going to buy. But I thought you had a really good tip here is investing in people. Without our people, there's really no one to implement the things, the technology, the hardware, all the software, those kinds of things. So making sure that you're investing in your workforce, in your teams to make sure that you're improving their skills, giving them some incentive to become better versions of themselves.
Yeah, doing training for your folks, it's very important. I will say this just really is being part of a manager. You really need to know your people. I wish we could manage everyone the same way, but it took a few years to learn that you can't. You really do have to treat people differently. People like to be dealt with in different ways. We all have different type of personalities, but for training, there's a lot of online training, and I've got some folks that's perfect for them. They can, buckle down and handle it, and we've got some folks where they got to have that face to face interaction, or they just really don't get a whole lot out of it. I think there's multiple avenues, but with kind of really need to know your folks and what they get the most out of. And like you said, just investing some folks. We have a GIS programmer, and he can do pretty much anything with Esri, but, besides him being an awesome person, one of the reasons he can do anything with Esri is because he's staying up to date, going to the conferences and getting training every year. And that goes just with all of your people. We sent a recent guy, he went to the NC State cybersecurity boot camp, and what he's learning at that boot camp is quite a bit. I mean, it's just the full gamut. It's basically like what I learned in my bachelor's just crammed into a year. So, there's a lot of good things out there, and there's a lot of free stuff out there, and I wouldn't be opposed to that. At the very least, I would be looking to see what's available to you for free. And there's a lot of stuff locally you can attend, like InfraGard. They do a lot of stuff throughout the year, and just whoever your associations are, we get plenty of stuff for free. So, at the very least, if you don't have a big budget, I would start looking at those free items. But if you have some money to spend, I definitely think you're gonna get that money back as you invest it in your folks.
I have a pretty good example of a way that you can offer training and still save some money. So we've been doing through a Global Knowledge, they're a well-known technical training. We've been doing they have kind of a subscription, right? Where you subscribe for a year, you get live classes. You can kind of sign up for as many live classes as you want during that year, and you can have a single price. And we were doing that kind of across the board for most of our folks on our IT team. And one thing we realized is we actually can kind of split that up. So for 1 year, we buy half of the team those licenses. And the next year, we buy half. And so by buying it in the middle of the year, we let everyone have a fall and a spring. So they get at least one class in the fall, one class in the spring. Then the next people get one class in the fall, one in the spring. The next person gets fall. So basically, what that allows is it allows them to definitely have at least one class or multiple classes if we can squeeze it in per year, but it actually divides the amount of subscriptions we need by half because we're not licensing everybody for every part of that year. So we've also used a company called Stormwind. They're pretty well known as well. They're a little cheaper, maybe not quite as good in my opinion, but also very reasonable for their subscription. And you get access to, I think, like three or 400 classes that you can do. So it really can help you save a buck there.
Yeah, and the thing that you mentioned, that actually is a great idea with the training and splitting it up. And just speaking of that, one thing that we talked about was just staggering. A lot of times we've got limited budget, we've got limited resources, limited people, and you really got to look at staggering. And the simple stuff is just looking at like your PCs and laptops. We do PCs every 5 years, we do laptops every 4 years. and iPads we do every 5 years. So we know we have a 110 iPads. So roughly, we're going to buy like 20, 21 iPads every year, and just staggering that will help make sure that you don't have just a huge cost and a huge lift. You also need to look at other things like, your infrastructure and hardware. You don't wanna go and so we've got like 110 or 120 network switches. If they all went end of life in 1 year, that would be a huge load or a huge lift and a huge cost. So just between all of that, even when it comes to your servers, do you want everything on server 2022? Do you have the resources? That's great if you can do it and are capable of doing it, but you gotta look at, do you have the manpower to make sure everything is upgraded?
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, I would say kinda to just add on to that a little bit, kind of evaluate if you're doing it too quickly. Me and you had some conversations after a show one evening. We were kinda talking about desktop swaps and how long we were going on desktops, and one thing I realized is, if we could squeeze an extra year out of desktops, if you go and you look at, like, this kinda goes into your next point, was talking about looking at things strategically and looking at things like, 3, 5, 10 years out. If we can go an extra year on any one item without having to switch it, if you look at like 20-year period, that you're probably gonna almost miss one entire cycle of switching it. So calculate up, how long does it take you to switch 25 iPads or whatever it is? And if that takes you, let's say 80 hours, it takes 2 weeks of someone's time to do that. Well, now think about it. If you can over 10 years save 80 hours, I mean, that's huge. I mean, that literally could be an entire technology project. That could be a new software you need to input, or that could be someone being able to look at existing hardware and software and try to make something better. Kind of to your automation point, the more we can take time out of our schedules, the more time we'll have to one, evaluate what's coming, think strategically, but also, make things better, improve things. Sometimes things don't improve because literally you're just putting out fire to fire to fire.
I've been there. So yeah, this is the other thing with budgeting is you want to think long term. So we're looking at 2025, but you can't just look at 2025 alone. You need to look at, and this is, you got to depend on your organization and stuff like that. But I would typically recommend somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Just kind of have an idea of, especially when it comes to infrastructure, you want to think long term. And if you're wanting to make a significant change, and you may need to make sure that you have the money, so you may need to prolong some certain items or shorten some certain items, whether they need replaced or not. I would definitely look from 3 to 5 years out. What do you think on that, Tanner?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is I would go into maybe a little more detail there. And I would say every individual item, you have to kind of look a little bit different, right? So, for example, like for us, cybersecurity, we don't necessarily think 3 to 5 years out. We think of maybe in that 1 to 2 year because things are changing so fast. You can put in a cyber tool, and honestly, let's think back to antivirus, traditional antivirus. Not saying it still doesn't help us in some way, but traditional antivirus at this point is almost obsolete. And if you get in there and you start thinking, well, okay, we're going to pick this particular cyber tool and we're going to run it for 5 years and like we're going to budget for it for 5 years, you can really get into a bind in years 3, 4, 5. But I think on most things, you might even be able to look a little bit further, like, with servers, things that are not kind of jumping off the page every 3 years with some sort of new model with double the horsepower. For us, that's probably like a 6 year process. So I would say absolutely be thinking strategically and looking future forward on that, but you may have to get a little more granular depending. Like, I think AI might be one of those areas where you need to be kind of in that 1 to 2 year mark as well, because things are accelerating so fast. If you get too in depth with something and you think about it in 3 years, it might not be the right tool or it might not even be adequate anymore.
That's one thing that we've had some ideas with the automation of AI, and we looked at it last year. We couldn't find the solution that was out there that was ready. And this year we just kept plugging, we weren't like constantly doing demos and stuff like that, but we kept digging. We finally found one that I think will help us out quite a bit. It's basically using AI to listen to all of the call recordings and evaluate all the calls. We talk about making people more efficient. Our supervisors over the member services, like how many calls can they audit a month, or a week? And they can't do that many. It's just they've got a lot of stuff to do. They're very busy folks, and using AI to look for keywords and really just kind of look at how the conversation goes as a whole. That's something that we're looking forward to. And honestly, the cost, you'd have to hire several people to listen to every single call that you have. And with AI, we can do it for much less than what even a single person would cost.
That's a great point. Kinda going back to that automation, you gotta be looking for efficiencies. There's no business that's gonna be okay just constantly adding. You have to figure out how you can do better with the same amount of people. Couple little quick points, and then I think we'll move to our 2025 interest and things we're looking at. If you're budgeting for something in IT, I would say make sure what you're budgeting for. If you're budgeting for a piece of software that only impacts IT, maybe this is an imaging software, or maybe this is a cybersecurity software, or whatever. Look at something that's actually going to save you time, especially if you're adding a software into your existing stack. Something else needs to be saving you time. That is not something that's sustainable. If you keep adding technology pieces in and they're not saving you time some other place, eventually you're gonna go underwater. Everybody's gonna be overworked. People, morale is gonna go down. And then honestly, service is gonna go down because it's gonna be at a point where you can't keep everything up. Now let's talk about maybe like some 2025 stuff. I know this was a really good idea you had talking about like what is interesting to us, what are we kind of looking at from our perspective, from maybe IT specific solutions and also cyber solutions.
Yeah, we're all at different spots, as far as protecting our network and just the technology that we use. So, anyways, just where we're at. The one thing this is actually something that Tanner introduced us to, and this is something that we just had an issue with, is a project management tool. So it really was just a couple years ago, maybe it's been 3 years at this point, went to a IT ticketing system, and that's been a great plus for us and for the, end users. But the thing that we struggle with is these large projects. We don't wanna have a ticket for 'em, and Tanner really highlighted this for me. One of the reasons we don't wanna do that, if you're looking at metrics and stuff like that, it's going to kill your metrics, having a long-term project as a ticket. So we've been using Microsoft To Do, but it really just doesn't have all the features and functionality that we need. So we're looking at a new project management tool just to make sure that we're keeping up with all these huge projects in the works all the time. And we just need a little bit more. The other thing is just replacing our end of life devices. And I brought this up earlier. We've got quite a few Ethernet switches and fiber channel switches that are long in the tooth and they're no longer getting support or they're going to be losing support next year. And we're looking to replace those. And it's dependent on every organization, but I feel like for our organization, if it plugs in to the wall. It's almost one of our projects. So we take care of cameras. And honestly, I've never been so excited. A lot of the cameras we have are old. And, I was always complaining about how my Wise cameras at home have a lot more functionality than what we have at work. They cost so much more at work. But we've been looking at some stuff and we're looking at these cameras. We're looking at some PTZ cameras coupled with some stationary cameras that use radar so they can, if it sees movement with the radar, it'll actually take that PTZ camera and point out. So we're super excited about that. Now, one thing that we've wanted for years is a SIEM. And honestly, the reason we didn't do it is just because we didn't have the resources to do it, or at least I felt to do it effectively. I've talked with some people that are like, yeah, we love our SIEM. And I've talked with plenty of people to say it's just too much work. We're really not getting a lot of it. But, between, we get some outside help for cybersecurity, but between that and the folks we've got on staff now, I feel confident that we can tackle that. So now for 2025, we're looking for that. And then this is something I learned from visiting another co-op, just using password managers for end users. And we had that show on it, me and you, Tanner, but that's something that we're wanting to finish that and budget for everyone next year to roll that out. What do you got going on for 2025?
Yeah, I think we got quite a few things. Like you said, you had a great point there. Everyone is in a different place, and honestly, I think that's what makes it so good is because people are in different places. I think back to my child, and as she grows, she can get clothes maybe from someone else, right? They can pass those clothes down, and if it felt like if everyone was right on the same page, it would feel like just a huge lift for every single project. Whereas because we have people in different ways and in different growth patterns, there's always someone that's kind of a little bit ahead in one particular area, and we can kind of use that, leverage their, you know, things that they've learned, mistakes they made, so that we don't have to do those, right? And I love that part about the community we're in. So on the IT side of things, we're looking for things to save us time. So one of the things we want to do is we have some point solutions for imaging. We have point solutions for updates and things like that, and trying to find a solution that'll put all of those things into one. So that's huge for us. We're also looking from a data perspective to try to advance our analytics program. So looking at potentially a data lake where we can actually get all of our data into one place, have it clean, filtered. That way we can build some of more advanced analytics without having to feel like if we change one of our particular vendors, now we got to redo all the analytics. So excited about that as well. And then AI think for us, we're at a position where we want to start looking at some AI use cases. A couple different ones that we're looking at. One, we're looking at some cloud options. One of them is called ThoughtSpot, and we're using that to do a use case or a proof of concept with simple language query. If you're not familiar, simple language query is basically taking common language and then translating that into data analytics language. You have a data analyst, right? And that's kind of what they do. In a lot of ways, they listen to what the person says, and then they write a report that pulls that out of the data set. Now, this is not necessarily for like extremely difficult reports, at least as of now, but there's a lot of like one time, like little, kind of reports that are needed. Like, I just need to know how many people we have in this particular area or with this particular feature on their account. It'd be really nice for someone to be able to type that out. I need all the accounts that have this particular feature, and then it would just pull that up for them. So excited about how AI can help us with that. Another thing is we're actually gonna start looking at a server to actually run some AI models locally. And really the reason we're doing this is we started doing the analysis of like cloud AI engines and what it would actually cost, and the cost is wild for some of these use cases. So we're gonna, obviously this is still not the same level as you might be able to get scale wise from a cloud provider, but can we run some of these models? There's some models that are open like Llama and some of the other ones. Can we run some of those locally, maybe save some cost for some of the smaller, less critical AI use cases we're doing? So on the IT side, that's kind of some things we're looking at. From a cyber point of view, we're looking at something to enhance our email. One of our highest risk is email phishing, and people clicking on things. And so we're looking at something that helps us enhance that cyber posture there. And then just like you, we're looking at a password manager as well, to kind of roll that out to our end users. We know that's something that we're kind of lagging a little bit on. So we're looking to fill that need. All right, Anthony. I think this was a great episode, very timely episode. You had a great idea on this. We're all going through this, or at least a lot of us are now. And I think everyone goes through this, right? It doesn't matter if it's you're going through it now, or it's 2 months, or it's a year from now. I think we got some great tips. So another episode in the books. We're grateful to have all of our listeners along for the ride. If you found today's insights on IT budgeting helpful, be sure to subscribe, share, and drop us a review. We'd also love to hear from you. Just shoot us an email at show@offwiredpodcast.com or reach out to us on social media. As a reminder, our episodes are released every other Monday. And until next time, this is Off the Wire.
Thank you, everyone.